Vehicle sales were at almost 54,000 in May. This is up 7.5% compared with the same month last year. Sydney Soundy, head of Vehicle and Asset Finance at Standard Bank, is here to unpack this for us. So we were chatting off air a minute ago, and it's really the commercial fleets that are being replaced. Is that all this is? A blip in the system because everyone decided to replace their fleets at the same time?
Yeah, look, if you look at what the economy is doing, one would suspect that the reason why the motor industry is doing as well as it is doing is actually a replacement cycle. So in the heydays of 2006, 2007, the numbers were very high. But as you know, as the economy went down in 2008, 2009, replacement was not as high. So I think from that period to now, you see a period of about 5 years, which in many instances is the right replacement cycle for vehicles.
Are we obsessed with motor cars in South Africa? In other words, because I always study news, that's what I'm saying. Because I look at number plates and I see, you look, Kevin, you see all the new BCs, or, the new number plate. So we turn over cars, and yet I would assume that cars are becoming more efficient and could last longer, but we love to replace motor cars. Is this in the figures?
We are very car crazy. So if you ask whether it's in the figures, I think it is, because if you look at the makeup of the space in the motor industry, about 70% of the motor industry volumes are made out of passenger vehicles. So it's a very significant part, although part of that passenger vehicle fleet also goes into rental businesses. But in the main, consumers are very car crazy, and they drive the activity in the South African motor industry.
Sydney, has there been an increasing demand from those rental fleets given the tourism numbers? Because
sorry, I nearly fell off the desk. Sorry, Kevin. Okay, that would have been interesting.
Well, that would have, certainly would have woken up the discussion.
Would have been something new for Business Tonight.
Yeah.
And of course, David would have taken over.
Apologies. Are we finding that the tourism numbers are helping the car rental industry? Or is that kind of a steady growth business in South Africa in terms of demand for vehicles?
I think the car rental is a steady growth environment, and we've seen, in today's numbers, that the car rental industry made up 4% of what was sold in the market. But normally, as you go towards the August-September period, that's where you see a high level of orders that comes from rental companies as they prepare towards the festive seasons.
The other thing,
can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
If you were trading vehicles, now you would pretty much short vehicles in the country if it was a trade, given the negative news flow, the pressure on GDP, the pressure on the consumer, taking into account that the 7.5% increase was a replacement cycle, it would be a sure bet to short vehicle sales in the country.
Yeah, I remember some of us, when the year began, we thought that this year is going to grow by about 6%. We're beginning to review that assessment on the basis of what is happening to the economy, because at that time the projection was 2.7% growth. We didn't have the volatility of the rand as we're currently having. So I think there's a need for us to reflect back on whether or not we're going to reach the 6%. But given that also in terms of activity in that market, there's orders that have been placed, particularly by manufacturers. As you know, about 70% of vehicles sold in the South African market is imported vehicles. So one assumes that there's a pipeline of orders that are still going to land in the country, and therefore that in terms of activity and competitiveness, we're going to see a lot of incentives.
I hope they've signed those contracts on those orders that have been placed.
Can I ask you, in the context of unsecured credit, we've got a lot of debate on unsecured credit. We've seen that being rampant. We've seen it now slowing. And in contrast, we've seen nothing happen in mortgages. So there's not much mortgage finance, house prices are depressed, etc. Where does car finance sit in the mix? In other words, what is the general banking attitude to financing motor vehicles? Are banks keen to finance vehicles? Are they hungry for more business in the car industry?
Look, I think banks play a major part in terms of fueling the sales in the environment, but it's not unrealistic, or, if one can put it, irresponsible financing, because if you look at how financial institutions have previously assessed credit, they've pretty much kept the same disciplines around ensuring that consumers do not get into undue debt. So I think it comes back to the issue that we raised, that where you need to replace a fleet and it's used for commercial purposes, you are at some points forced to replace that. But in addition to it, the activity that happens in the consumer space in terms of us actually being a much more car-crazy nation actually helps.
So you're still prepared to give money to people? I'm going to put in my application tomorrow. I want a new car. David, you wanted to go
just
in there.
On the repossessions, I mean, are you seeing an increase at Standard Bank? What's the trend in repossessions?
Yeah, look, we're seeing similar sort of trends, but we're anticipating that as the economy does what it is doing now, that things will become a little bit much more challenging than it is currently.
And then you have a big second-hand market.
Indeed, and that's also a very interesting market because, I mean, if you look at the first quarter of this year in terms of vehicle price inflation on the used car market, we've seen a decline there of 1.4% in terms of downward movement. Whereas on the vehicle price inflation in terms of the new vehicle sales, there it has grown from 2.2 to 2.4. In terms of what the rand is doing, you're going to see further increases in prices. And then there's the pressure of fuel prices as well that are related to what is happening to the rand exchange rate. So that is also going to have an impact in terms of how, particularly in the passenger space, consumers actually choose the type of vehicles that they purchase.